Palo Alto Networks Firewall. We're back for some more Content ID now, the concepts of this. We're going to get a whole lot more into detail of, well, the details. The little itty-bitty things, the nitty-gritty that we can get down to and tweak and manipulate and filter and essentially protect ourselves against. These are the important pieces. So the wonderful world of Content ID, like I said, is about the details and stuff. It allows us to get a really granular look inside many of the applications we're doing. Okay? We'll find it referred to, and this may be important for questions that you see, as a stream-based architecture. Okay? So kind of keep that in mind just in terms of a reference as we go through here. Okay? So really it involves real-time threat prevention. So there's a whole engine involved, which means some of the CPUs inside your Palo Alto device are dedicated to doing this. It works with features of App ID, works with things from URL information, really in order to help best identify and limit unauthorized data transfer. Okay, so content is really the key portion of this. So details inside our applications. Now, we talked about security profiles back in our Nugget on Security policy, so one of those add-on things. Remember, they only get called during a permit. Okay, so permit policy, policy permit is kind of the important part in there. Then we can call profiles. Now, we have a number of different profiles, and this is just for further review of information, or detailed review of information in here. Okay, so let's see. Let me change my color here. So profile types. And these are all revolving around Content ID. Okay, so we have antivirus. Oops, can't spell today. Now, why that should be different than any other day is beyond me. So antivirus, and pretty much like it says, it's an antivirus portion. Okay, we have anti-spyware, and I'll go into detail on each of these, by the way. Okay, so anti-spyware portions, we have vulnerabilities, basic exploits and things like that. We have URL filters. We have file blocking, and then we have data filtering. So each of these, okay, so each of these as we go is a different profile that we can configure. You may configure all of them if you want to, but it gives us different points of view into the internal data structures of what information is being transferred back and forth on here. Okay? So kind of think through that as we go in here. These are all about, and when we define this, by the way, it's under the Objects menu. Okay, so I'll just put Objects up here. Okay, so Objects and then Security Profiles, and then pick what type that you want. So once we start looking at things like this, okay, like our antivirus engine, our antivirus basically is kind of like it says. It's able to, be used to determine whether a particular virus is detected. Now, that works for a lot of things. So, and default action, by the way, is to block in all apps except SMTP, POP3, and IMAP. Okay? So really that means email. Now that makes it kind of interesting in there because the email stuff, the default is actually to log. Now you can change it. You have built-in profiles. I'll call the two profiles on here, change my color again, default or strict. And of course we can modify however we want to for what action under which protocol. So the ones under email are designed to alert us at first because there's a lot of people who have antivirus stuff in the clients, on the email servers, on the things like that. So the thought process is just not to waste the time for doing things on here if we have something that's very robust and can do processing elsewhere. Okay? So it's kind of like everything. Don't put all your eggs in one basket in terms of overloading your CPU, because of course if we get a lot of email, that can be a whole lot of processing. Let it use its brains to really kind of do the other stuff and just passively say, okay, I got an alert here, so you might want to double check on that, because if I find it and the email server didn't or client didn't, there might be a problem for it. So this antivirus portion will detect viruses or files like that, and many spyware and malware things too, but detects them on the way in from a file point of view. Okay? You can also, and we'll show a lot of this during the configuration nugget, you can also check a packet capture box with there. So that way you can get information like a Wireshark type transfer that shows you the details of what things you're actually capturing, and that way you can kind of either help verify stuff or reduce your false positives. So kind of important things in there. With everything, by the way, exceptions can be listed. So therefore, if you find a false positive, watch the log files, look at the threat ID, and know what to exclude in there. Now, anti-spyware, and we really kind of get the same things in terms of the default profiles, but this one is behavior. So let me kind of put a file over here, where this is behavior. So interesting things with viruses or malware in particular. The antivirus engine, especially if it's in the email part where alert is our default, will not prevent you from receiving the virus. You may still get it in that aspect. Hopefully, like I said, we got everything in place or changed to a strict format and block and email too. But let's say that you did download the file, if something managed to get by on there. With the anti-spyware, what we're doing on here, and again, this is for traffic that's passing through your Palo Alto, we will identify and mitigate and reduce the effect of the particular virus. Now, it will also log it to let you know, because, obviously if we're sending out a whole lot of packets, that's not going to do anything to this machine over here to fix it. But if I can stop things from getting through and messing with your servers, or messing with people on the internet, or command and control stuff, and I can alert you, that's kind of the important part for it. So it is more behavior-oriented in that aspect. It will also, you'll also go through the same default profiles, either default or strict on there. Strict is going to block all the critical, the high, and the medium threats that are on there out of the box. You can also check packet capture for it. So a lot of similarities and things. Each spyware profile may contain multiple rules based on the type of threat, because we've got, like I said, the critical, the high, the medium, the low, the informational. I think those are the 5 levels, if I remember right. But in any event, we've got multiple levels of each of the threats coming in on there, and exceptions can be logged as well. Now, there's a special tab inside the anti-spyware for DNS signatures. This is a lot of doing things for identifying known command and control domains. You can also monitor where hosts want to go, like the phone home kind of thing. So as there is suspicious behavior, we can see exactly what's going to be going on in there. Now, my DNS part, so it's kind of important for it. So DNS, because everybody's going to look stuff up, so it's always going to be part of it. Now, we can have different actions. We can alert, I can block, I can allow, or I can sinkhole. So, and very powerful stuff. Now, the alert puts in a log, the block says no, the allow lets it go through, yada, yada, yada. The sinkhole is a very interesting one, because what this does is it allows your Palo Alto device, so one of your loopback addresses, if you will, to pretend to be the DNS server. So your response comes in from the user, either going directly out or over here to one of your servers, wherever your DHCP server, or your DNS server happens to be, makes a request locally, that request happens to go out. As it comes through here, if we identify that kind of behavior to a known domain when the request first comes in, the Palo Alto can say, oh yeah, that's me, I'll go ahead and answer that, and send a response back. And either not give anything back, essentially, or give a false set of information back, so that all traffic then goes from here out to a sinkhole, again, a place where we're going to discard all the traffic. So the client thinks everything is good, the spyware software anyway, thinks everything is good on there, sends out traffic, does what it needs to do. Your Palo Alto, on the other hand, protects everybody and logs that information so you can be alerted about the presence of that spyware on there. So kind of cool things that we have going on for, moving that information around. Vulnerability protections. Okay, so that's kind of my next idea on here. And this is about a lot of known exploits. Okay, so things like buffer overruns or OS vulnerabilities, stuff like that. There's a lot of predefined information on here. Again, two predefined profiles too, default and strict, same kind of idea, or create your own. Now, this focuses on what's called a CVE list. Okay, so the CVE list, and again, kind of know that from a question standpoint you might get, is the common vulnerabilities and exposures. And it's done from a company called MITRE, but it's kind of the well-known thing that all security guys happen to deal with. Okay? And like everything else, you can put exceptions in there, you can put your own profiles in, so you've got a lot of control over going in there. So that's kind of the cool thing. One thing while I'm thinking about it. Your anti-spyware, the different file types that we have, or types of things that you'll kind of get in there that we can select on. Obviously, the any category always works, but we have adware, I have backdoor, botnet, browser hijack, let's see, data theft, keylogger, let's call them worms, but network worms, and peer-to-peer, and spyware. So we get a lot of different categories of things that all fall into my anti-spyware applications. So anyway, but that's it on there. Okay? Anything that we have, by the way, from my antivirus, from my anti-spyware, or my vulnerability information, so this stuff up above here, will all show up in the threat log. Let's see how to put that. So that would be in the threat log. So definitely pay attention to that as far as you're looking at your information on there. Of course, that's under the monitor tab. All your logging and stuff is going to be in there. So watch for that as you go. So monitor logs and threat log. Log will all be kept locally in there unless you set up a log profile to do log forwarding. Okay? So that is kind of an interesting thing about all the variety of logs that you can get on your Palo Alto, is it's not by default going to be sending everything to a centralized syslog server. If you want to do that, you got to go through that. We'll have a separate nugget on the log administration, so kind of look for those details if you want to do those things. But otherwise, certainly look at them locally and go through and note the information. Next portion, my URL filter. Okay, so URL filtering is really kind of based on permitted traffic in there. You can define a blacklist or a whitelist. You can also work based on the URLs and categories. Now, two different types that we have, and again, these are licensed. I guess take a step back. You can create categories on your own if you want to do all these things. Otherwise, for relying on the detail work that somebody else is going to do, because there's a boatload of categories and websites and everything else out there. So, presuming that you and I don't want to sit down and try to filter out all these websites and everything else, because God knows there's way too many, but assuming that, you're going to go for a licensed approach for the URL filtering, and you can either use the Palo Alto Networks database, so it's called a PanDB, or we can do BrightCloud. So those are the two options that we have to work with for URL filtering directly off of the Palo Alto. So all those fun things in there. Now, I guess kind of an interesting thing to keep in mind. Okay, so blacklists and whitelists can certainly, help make your life a little bit easier, they can be used in there. I can use my names. I can type anything in that I want to. The asterisk can also be used. Let me go ahead. I'm going to clear this off for right now. I need more space to write the comparison things out. So as we start looking at, I guess, an idea between URL categories, what did we do? There we go. All right. When we start looking at things between the categories and URL filters, we're kind of getting a comparison in there. Now, obviously, I'm going to have a lot more control with my URL filters. So this is used in security policy. We'll say for policy match. So do specific things, and only matches on predetermined or custom info. So let's call it custom info. The action, of course, is by policy. And logging is going to be in there. It's going to be in the traffic log. So that's my standard log for things as far as where policy matches are going to be in there. Now, URL filtering, on the other hand, is applied to allowed traffic. Applied. So the allowed security profile, that traffic in there. I can do predefined, custom, whitelist, or blacklist. So all sorts of information that I have there. My actions on here are actually per category, so not just for the entire policy. And there's a separate log. There's a URL filter log. So a lot more control, a lot more singularity, separation. Separation is probably a better word. A lot more separation to doing it with the URL filter. Now, my order of operations for things. So as I start looking at all this, the first thing that I will match on is my block list, or the blacklist. The second thing that I'll match on is my allow list, or my whitelist. The third thing is going to be the custom categories. And number 4 is going to be the PanDB or BrightCloud categories. So we'll just say the category database. Okay? So I'm going to match on things in that order when I do a URL filter. My filter actions are going to be to allow, to block, or alert. Those are kind of the 3 common ones, so we'll just put those up here. Allow, block, or alert. But I have a couple other options that are interesting as well. Okay? So I have one called continue, and it'll allow access to the website, but it makes the user click on a web page. So basically there's a log information that says the user agreed to know to go here. So you can put up your disclaimer or something along those lines, let the user click on it, but you'll go ahead and continue. There's also one that will block by default, but allows for an override. And that, again, requires a user clicking and entering a specific password that you've defined on there. So all that information, again, and logs it as well, you can get stuff going through still. Okay, so you can allow your users to say, yes, I know I'm not supposed to go here, but I'm going to go here anyway because I want to. And you can do the continue and just let that automatically happen, or you can do it where they need to have an override password in order to make that happen, and it's really up to you how to define that in policy. This, gets into a lot of, I guess, interesting stuff about human behavior versus HR policies. That may be something you take up with your organization, with your HR organization versus the IT organization, and kind of balance your, usability versus security versus the things that you're trying to do to regulate your users. It's entirely a whole different ballgame. I'm not going to give any recommendations on that because that really is just a per corporate behavior decision. We can also set up URL filter response pages as far as our custom notes about blocked access. Those are all in the device response pages menu, and again, we'll show that during the configuration portion. In PenOS 6.0 and later, there's also some new enhancements to URL filtering stuff. So we'll just say 6.0 or greater than equal to 6.0 translation pages. So an interesting, we'll call it workaround, bypass, security avoidance, but an interesting way that some people were getting by old school URL filters was to click on translation, translate something into a foreign language, and because that becomes an embedded URL, not a direct URL in there, it often would bypass many of the URL filters that are out there. So in 6.0 and later, we have the ability to look at embedded information for specific things like translation pages, and also we'll call it search cache. So you know how when you're on Google or Yahoo and doing a search and stuff like that, you can click on links as cached page? Now, for one, that's great if a server's not up and you can still look at some information that was there. But two, people were using that to bypass URL filters. So it's kind of an interesting little idea for stuff. But anyway, so 6.0 and later allows us to look at the embedded information to not have that problem anymore. So all the fun things. As a note, by the way, if your URL filter license expires, you will only be able to filter on your custom categories at that point. Okay, so things that you've manually put in until you actually renew your license on there. So small things. But anyway, that's the idea for URL filtering. Now we got two more little ideas as far as where we're at. That was the file blocking and the data filtering. So clear that stuff off for us. Now, file blocking is a very simple method for things. So file block is by extension. So by file extension is the name of it in there. So I can block, I can alert, very simple actions on stuff that I have in there. I can continue again. So again, user response and log. I can also do a forward. Okay, so from a reaction standpoint, forward, and both my data information, but particularly file blocking, brings up a new thing to something called wildfire. And yes, there's probably a Bad Country song about that one too. But wildfire, and we need to know this from a normal point of view and specifically from a lab point of view, is Palo Alto's cloud-based sandbox. Okay, it's probably the easiest way to describe that. So wildfire is it really is a virtual sandbox environment. So what you'll do is it's a method of testing malware and things like that to see whether things are good or bad. So FileBlock by extension, if you forward it to Wildfire, you're taking it and sending it off to the cloud. Well, gathering up the packets and sending it off, but still same idea. So you're sending it off to the cloud for testing, and that'll get you there to see whether it's going to be a good thing or a bad thing. Okay? It's a nice way for somebody else to test stuff out, because I know that you and I don't have the time to test out every single file, nor do you really want to. I mean, unless you have your own sandbox environment, it's a big pain. So doing this, another subscription basis, by the way, but doing this on a subscription basis gives me and you a whole lot more control over being able to send things off, being able to look for zero-day information, testing things by extension, and really nobody is going to complain to us if we send 4,000 files up there and only one of them is bad, or even if none of them are bad. So doing it by extension, like exe files, is a great way to do that. Make sure that my users aren't doing something, well, stupid, that they shouldn't be, or at least that I can see right away what the effect is going to be on it. Zero-day gives me more control in a centralized location, that now I can see the traffic coming in and out, protect myself regardless of what everybody's antivirus updates happen to be, or which program they happen to be using, or what other controls are going on in there. I can at least be aware of these things, you and I, and as an example, you can sit there and proactively go out and tell people that. Now, wouldn't it be kind of cool to go to the guys who are the desktop admins and say, hey, dude, new zero-day out there, just wanted to let you know about that. And they're looking at you going, really? You think you're going to tell me something about my operating system? Well, guess what? We can. How awesome is that? So forward to Wildfire is a new action that we can do in there. And I can do continue and forward and stuff like that also, or permit, if you will. Permit, by the way, there is no action for it. Simply don't block it. It's the small things. I know. I understand that. So file blocking is going to be a block of some sort, but there are interim steps in there that we can get user information or user permission, if you will. We can do the forward to Wildfire. I can do continue and forward. So all sorts of things that we can do subscription-based. We'll call this subscription. Okay, so information that you have as far as being able to do that. So file blocking, great thing as far as looking at my content and all the stuff in there. Now, Wildfire updates, by the way, these things update hourly. So that's pretty fast. So verified, anything that we send out there, and you can go to a website as well, wildfire.paloaltonetworks.com, see all of your firewalls, how many things you've sent, how many things you've logged, all that fun stuff to go with it. And how many are benign, which is good, or how many are actually malware. So you can see all that stuff in there. Anything that is bad, of course, you'll get signatures updated hourly, so you don't have to send it out. You can just know to block it right away. Any of these things, by the way, feed into my weekly antivirus updates. So the good news is, even if you don't get a Wildfire subscription, even if you're not part of that licensing, you're still getting the benefit of what everybody else is doing. Now, obviously, going from hourly to weekly, a little bit different. You won't get quite the same up-to-date zero-day protection, but you at least still get benefits out of it. So that's always a good thing in there. So that's kind of the idea of what file blocking, and particularly Wildfire, is going to do for me. My last portion that we look at is the data filtering. Now this is specifically, or we'll just call it specific content. So this is like the bits and bytes kind of idea. You're looking for things like credit card information, like social security numbers. Those, by the way, are already built in. So built-in patterns, kind of the normal thing that you want to have in there. You can put weights on them, as in like, how many credit cards before I trigger something, or how many social security numbers. That might be the idea that if somebody sends one, you'll allow emails to go out where somebody wants to say, hey, here's my credit card number, or here's my social security number. Yeah, I know, don't get into the discussions about most email protocols are clear text and blah, blah, blah. There's reasons not to do that, but if it's an internal-only email as an example, or if we're doing all of our connections over an SSL-based connection, okay, yeah, there's some better information in there. But let's assume that's not the case and that somebody can do something stupid. If they send one, let them do it. That may be your policy. So my trigger may be on 2 of them. 2 credit card numbers, 2 socials. Anything more than that, there can't be anything good coming out of it. So there's going to be my trigger for this information. And I can block it and kind of see what's going on with it. I can put the violation in there. This would be a good one, by the way, to do my packet capture. So from a HR, or I suppose I should say from a prosecuting point of view, if you're going to have a policy out there that says you shouldn't be sending out Social Security numbers or credit card information, and all of a sudden somebody does it, well, it's one thing to find it, log it, and stop it. It's another thing to be able to go to the person and say, what the hell are we doing? We don't want the FBI coming here. So, no, you're gone. So we want to have the backup information to be able to go with that. And it'll log where it came from, what it was, that it was blocked, all the information that goes with it. So you can also set up your own specific content filters based on your own intellectual property. It is regular expression based. So you've got all sorts of things that you can do on there, and it can get complicated, but it's also very powerful to give us the information. When we start looking at setting up our own filters, definitely test it out, okay? Because otherwise you may find that you create a filter that's a little too specific and can cause some issues. So play around with it. Don't feel bad about doing that. Once you've configured any of your policies, and this goes for all of those different types, the AV, the AS, the vulnerability, all that jazz. Once you configure these, just go attach them into your security policy. Remember, the rule must be permit-based before a security profile can be attached. So you can enable these individually, or, so I will say individually, however many of them that I want to do, or I can create security profile groups. Okay, and this is just a way to bundle things together to make my life a little bit easier, so to reduce the number of configuration steps that I have. So those are kind of the simple things on the types of Content ID. Now, last but not least here, I do want to go through a little bit about the flow, just because we'll need to be familiar with some of this stuff from an exam standpoint. So I pop this up here. So my Content ID flow. So once we start out, my information comes in, goes into the different decoders. I have, different signatures that I check on, to see what information that I'm matching, check my policy and stuff like that. I can do my URL match at that point in time. And my URL filtering database feeds into this. Otherwise, I pass on to the single pass pattern match. So this, again, different engine from a CPU standpoint. All of my other things, my pattern database, stuff feeds into my pattern database, whether it be my CVE or custom signatures or stuff from Wildfire or the different antivirus update signatures that I have, my threat protection subscription. All that stuff feeds into the pattern database. So I can do my single pass pattern match on there, and each of these other pieces, my other matches, will take place. Okay, so vulnerability matching, exploits, malware matching, botnet command and control, file type, or the data match, the specific content I'm looking for, and all of that feeds into my reporting info and policy enforcement on there. So that's the general flow of Content ID that we have to work with. The wonderful world of Content ID. So all this stuff in here, by the way, remember what we talked about, that this was a stream-based architecture. Okay, and that's very important for thinking about how we process stuff, as well as any questions that we might get asked along the way. Architecture, there we go. Okay, but it does this, the stream-based versus file-based makes it much better from a processing point of view. So it gives us the real-time view of the world in there. But remember all of the different policy types that we had. Okay, so we had the antivirus, we had the anti-spyware, or malware, whatever one you want to call this. So my anti-spyware stuff that contained all that. I had my CVE, or my vulnerability and exploit portion in there. I had my URL filter. I had my file block. and I had my data filter. And I had the ability again, put these all in policies with allow. So security policy with allow. Okay, or I can put it into, individually or a security group or security profile group, which would still get put on the policies with allow, but I can do them individually or via a group in there. So that's pretty much it for my content ID. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.